Good morning, everyone. We welcome you to the Wednesday, March the 13th meeting of the Board of Trustees for the Utah Transit Authority. We'd invite you to stand and join us in repeating the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll next have our Safety First Minute with Sheldon Shaw.
Chair, trustees, appreciate the opportunity again to give the Safety Minute. I'd like to highlight today the concern we should all have for some of our fellow employees who work outside for their shifts. There's a gigantic effort that happens overnight each night for pullout. There's several of our fellow employees who are working on platforms and on grade crossings and on the alignment. And on days like today, we need to pay attention to their well-being. So thanks.
Thank you, Sheldon. I'd also just point out to folks that today is the glamorous of all days, colorectal cancer day. But not if you are 45 or older and haven't had your exam, you should definitely do that. I will just say, when my doctor started me on that, because it was a family thing, every 3 years when I've gone in, they've found polyps and removed those, and you avoid cancer. That way it's the easiest way to do it and not as brain damaging as you would think. So if you haven't done it, there's no excuse. We'll next go to a more sane discussion on public comment. Bob, anything?
We do have one comment from the internet. It's from George Chapman. Claudia Johnson said it best a few months ago. Free Fare Day should be on Saturday since parents and grandparents take all their kids on the train frontrunner, which leaves no parking. That discourages long-term ridership increase. Refer to the Booz Allen Hamilton study of 26 mass transit agencies. No parking discourages ridership.
Okay. Thank you, George. Any other comments, Bob, or is that it? Okay, thank you. Next, we'll go to our approval of our March 6th minutes.
I move approval of the minutes of our meeting on March 6th.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion passes. Next, we'll go to our agency report, and we have Steve Meyer with us today on the phone. Steve?
Good morning, Chair. Sheldon kind of stole my thunder. I just want to recognize all the folks that are out there dealing with the storm today, and particularly our facilities maintenance and maintenance away crews. They face a lot of challenges out there. As I looked at the web cameras at the various stations today, there's quite a bit of wind and snow from about Layton to American Fork. If you're fortunate enough to be in Provo or Orem, it's not a bad day down there. But they get out there and do their work and keep the system running. I'm not seeing very minor delays today on the red line, but nothing on front runner and tracks, the rest of the tracks line. So that's a great work on their part, and we sure do appreciate them. Thank you.
Kent said he politely waved to a lot of people on I-15 as he came here. So
People were waiting around for the rest of us.
Yeah, well, we certainly echo those comments, Steve, and we're grateful to that the crews have kept people moving in such a great way. Thank you. Next is our financial report for January of 2019, and we'll go to Bob Biles to make that report.
Thank you. I want to thank the accounting staff. They're trying to close out year end, go through an audit, and get these financial statements out. So our accounting staff did a great job getting these out. Take a look at the dashboard first. As you can see, sales tax, this is still from last year. We won't receive the first of our 2019 sales tax revenues until about 10 days from now. At that point, we'll be able to start talking about how we're doing. But you can look at that sales tax growth that we introduced last month, and you can see it shot down in the November, but in December it bounced back up. But it's still a little bit underneath our long-term forecast of 5%. So we'll continue to monitor that closely. I think this is a good graph as we continue to look at this. If there's other ways to look at sales tax, we'll keep thinking of ways to make a presentation that's helpful for the board. As far as fair revenue, we were up slightly from the budget. Operating expense, we're a little bit under for the month of January. We'll get into some line items because there's some interesting things that happen in January when we get to that area. The subsidy per rider, we're right at 511, slightly below what the budget would say we should be at 513. And our diesel fuel was 179 in January. In February, it was about $1.85. So we're about $1.80. Ridership was slightly up in January from the prior year. Questions on the dashboard before we move on?
Do we have any sense, and I guess this is, I guess we just know when we go to the pump, is that $1.79 figure, does anybody expect it to stay there very long? I mean, that's a great savings.
Yeah, I haven't looked at it since we did the budget forecast. We look at the EIA forecast when we're doing the budget, and then try to estimate, we take that, the Rocky Mountain EIA, and then take off what the estimated taxes are because it includes the taxes. And so rule of thumb for me is about 75 cents below what you see at the pump is approximately what we pay. It's been a little bit lower than that in January and February.
Yeah. Okay.
Sales tax collections, again, this is year to year, 2018 over 2017. We ended up the year at about 6.3% overall increase in sales tax. That was above what we budgeted, but when we did our long-term forecasting, we'd estimated about 6.9% for the base for 2019 sales taxes, which means we put in a 5% increase for this year. We need to have about a 5.5% increase this year over prior year to hit our budget. Maybe not unexpected because we had such a big run-up in the second half of 2017. Sales tax collections were accelerating, so it's a little bit harder for the second half of the next year to show the same kind of growth. We do projections. It's a little hard because you don't know if it's going to be a year that starts slow and increases as it goes along or starts fast and slows down. So we actually take 3 or 4 years and try to average those out when we do our projections. I'm going to go to this one first. This is the variance by type because you'll notice wages and benefits are about $780,000 under the allocated budget for January. And I think that's important to note that because you'll see this negative numbers showing up when you look at some of the department numbers. I delved into this a little bit more than I normally do. And what I found out is January, our accruals are a little heavy over what we budget, and also January is when we do our matching for all of our employees on our 457. So that shows up in January, as do the benefits on that, as do some of the accruals. So as we go forward, one of the things we'll look at is on our budgeting, do we need to budget a little bit more in January because we have these things rolling through every year. So I want to explain that because that helps explain some of the
Can I ask a question
numbers
on that
here.
salary
Sure.
piece? So I assume that somewhere in the 12 months of budget, those sort of estimates are included. And do you anticipate it?
Yes.
Just don't maybe have them apportioned to the right month.
Yeah. So when you look at the February statement, which should be here next week, I was working on that yesterday. This turns slightly positive in February.
Okay.
So again, that rolls through some of these. You'll see it in the light rail and bus and some of those areas. So anyway, the biggest positive here is the administrative side. Most of that is because of IT contracts, professional services. That was about $700,000 favorable, and then the legal department was about $200,000 favorable. The rest are fairly close. The light rail is under mainly because of capitalized expense. We have expenses in the operating budget for people that then gets transferred to the capital budget for things like our light rail overhaul projects. And we were slightly below what we'd budgeted in January. And of that number, that was about $239,000.
Do they generally balance out, though, from month to month? I mean, the month of January, we show a negative, but for the year, do they kind of level out to where you're pretty accurate?
You know, we would hope so. It's the transfer to capital that just
Right.
depends on how much work there is, and sometimes it's held up by parts. There's other things
Sure.
that come into play there, but that's something we do track closely because it has an effect on the overall operations. So if you budget a certain amount of money to go to capital, but it doesn't go there, you're running it through your operating expense. And the question would be on the capital side, are you advancing that project
Right.
at the rate you need to advance it at? So we look at that internally. And then just looking at it by the types of expense, most of those are fairly close. The parts recovery, warranty is mainly because of warranty recovery in this case. Fuel, we talked about the savings there. That is $453,000. That's the diesel out of that $560,000. Services, we talked about the IT and legal, and there were a few others that are in there. And then the wages and benefits, again, it's the accruals at the end of the month and having those too large, and then the 457. Questions on January?
On the 457, we made some changes into that program. Did that affect any sort of, I guess it probably didn't affect anybody this?
No, it didn't affect anybody, really. But yeah, it's been an ongoing complaint over the years that January expenses are up, and I dived into it a little bit more this time and figured out what's going on here.
Beth?
Bob, I had a question about services. I guess it kind of dovetails onto what Kent was asking. Does this balance out over the 12 months, and is this just kind of like an unusual circumstance? How, did we increase service? What is that exactly?
Yeah, sometimes it depends on getting projects started, and it's not unusual for some things to run over a summer period, or to, now that the budget's been adopted, it takes a while to get the RFP out and to get someone hired and get the work done. And occasionally we find ourselves projects we'd hoped to work on, get delayed to the next year because there's just too much work.
Bob, one question I had, at the very beginning of my career, I probably worked, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years in project costing, mostly on the construction side, but the system had a way to charge your time and material straight to the capital project. Do you have that luxury on
We
your
do
system?
have that ability for people that are full-time on a capital project. They charge their time. Other times we have people that could be operating, could be capital, and then we say, tell us exactly how much time you spent on the capital project, and we'll transfer that time.
But you have to do a manual transfer. They can't, like at their time card level, say, I spent 30 hours on operations. And
there are
10
some
hours
that are charged directly with payroll. Others we have to because it's not full-time.
I see. Okay.
I don't know the specific details. I know people can charge the projects. I just don't know if it's direct. I know on some of these capital projects, it's charged in the operating budget, and then we transfer it over.
Yeah, the only reason I asked the question is, you don't have the fluctuations of waiting for adjustments, and also people's memories are short and forget where they were working, past the payroll time. And you just dealt with that all the time. And in our case, it was a building property management development company. And sometimes they'd be doing maintenance on the building, and sometimes they'd be working like on a tenant build out. And so to be able to do that at the payroll level just made a ton of sense.
Sure, and we've had incentives to make sure people work on capital projects, and since it's in the operating budget, if you aren't charging to capital for the projects you had budgeted for, your operating budget's going to be over.
Yeah.
And so there's an incentive for all the managers to watch that carefully.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Oh, I did have one question. As I was looking at the financial statement, there's like an other revenue. What falls in other revenue? And I notice there's not quite $1 million gap there. And
so let's see, that includes the Salt Lake County, Salt Lake City, includes Utah County, the money we get from them.
Okay.
For the UVX, it includes what we've budgeted for Salt Lake City this year. It includes some real estate that we leases and revenues we get from people using our real estate. And then there's a couple of other things in there. Those are the big ones.
So the fact that it hasn't quite hit the budget, is that sort of you're anticipating the payment coming, or overestimated maybe?
Yeah, so this goes back to looking at how you allocate that budget. And have we appropriately got the budget for January correct?
January's always tough.
Yeah, it's always tough.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Some of that property lease revenue that comes in, is that from property that we have purchased over time and didn't need to, this is right acquisition or something like that, and we don't need it right now, and so we're leasing it back out until we do?
No,
that kind of thing?
No, generally it's properties that we have that others want to use it. They need to cross our property, like go through our rail lines or, things of that nature.
All right. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. I guess this is information only. We don't need to adopt anything here, so thank you, Bob. We'll next go to our pre-procurement, and this item is on a microtransit pilot RFP, and I show you, Steve, maybe you're introducing this one, or?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This item is very exciting for us to get this procurement for a pilot program underway. And Jaron Robertson, sorry. Is he there? I see him.
He actually did come up to the table and didn't leave you hanging.
Yeah, I'm watching about 10 seconds behind what's actually happening in real life, so I know he's a pretty fast guy. This is a South Salt Lake County microtransit pilot, and you'll notice on the form that the board has, it says if it's included in the budget, we're applying for funds through a budget amendment. This is what Bob Biles was just talking about on the financial, that we are showing some of that revenue in there for Salt Lake City and Salt Lake County in the fourth quarter in the budget. It is in the operating budget. It hasn't been allocated to specific projects. And this is one that we're proposing to use some of those Salt Lake County funds for. So, Jaron, you want to describe this for us?
Yeah, thank you. It's an exciting time here in our transportation industry. As I think probably most everybody in this room knows that the mobility landscape has changed across our community, and the private sector has really enabled us as a transit agency to look and do things differently when we talk about service. And we as a team here at UTA have really looked at South Salt Lake County, that being the cities of Riverton, Harriman, Draper, and Bluffdale, and looking at what our current service looks like there and the challenges that we do have. We run 3 flex routes within those areas, and flex routes, just real quickly, I mean, they serve a purpose, and we as an agency put those into place to meet the needs of the agency. But what we have seen over the years is that they're not necessarily effective in that area, and not meeting the needs that we potentially have in that community, where we're seeing high demand or increased demand for service where we just can't cover it. So microtransit, utilizing new technologies and concepts, gives us an opportunity to vastly increase the ability to service those communities in a more effective and potentially efficient way as an agency. In addition, some of the benefits are really increasing service to people with disability, increasing access to opportunity, and providing new and unique methods to better provide a transportation service. So we believe as an agency, as we've looked through how the existing service operates and where we're at, that this could be a very potential or high potential solution to meet the needs of the community. And it's not just this area. I think there's several areas throughout our service area where microtransit has high potential to start to help us do things better and more effectively. So we are proposing to implement a 12-month pilot program so that we can, as an agency, begin to get this operational experience and have an understanding of how the system works and how we can meet these needs. And this is being the right area, we believe, for us to test these services. In addition, as I talked about these flex routes, we also believe that during the course of a pilot program, it really makes sense to continue the operations of those services for many different reasons. But we do think we can, over the course of a year, really have a strong understanding and evaluation framework to know that should this be successful, we'd want to look at how we would continue to move forward with those flex routes in the future. As part of the pilot too, we would also recommend outsourcing the full operations. There are numerous vendors out there who could come in and stand up the operations, both from the technology perspective, the vehicle and vehicle maintenance, bringing in operators, and then providing those administrative and overhead services. If I can go to the next slide real quick. Oh, I have that, sorry. Part of this too is really strong marketing and outreach. We've looked at agencies across the country who have been piloting types of programs and ensuring that we can learn from their successes and failures. And we want to make sure that we are targeting that community and ensuring that they have a strong understanding about how this program works so that we are successful in the pilot too. What we have done is really great work in working with a company called VIA to simulate how microtransit would behave in this area. And through that, we have worked with Wasatch Front Regional Council and then internally with our planning and OAS groups to feed a model that would help us kind of simulate that service in the area and get a good understanding of how ridership would the type of ridership we would get, where those destinations people in the community would be going, and then get some operational costs associated with that. Within that service area, there are 3 rail stations. So we'd actually see about 40% of the customers in that area looking to commute or to connect into transit as a first and last mile connection, while we do see some high level of the population looking at for local transit service as well. Our estimates too don't necessarily account for riders on the flex routes. So there's an opportunity to educate and move those riders from flex route service onto the microtransit system as well. So our current estimates are about 350 riders per day just on the microtransit services. With the flex routes operating, we carry about 272 riders per day on the flex route services. So there's potential to see the microtransit service perform better than expected. So with that, based upon our estimates, we would project the service to cost around $1.65 million. And that again is a fully loaded cost where we bring in vehicles, operators, the technology, and then overhead services. Understanding there's potential for a higher demand and higher ridership, which was also noted in our simulation services, we would want to put some sort of contingency into this should we experience that higher ridership and demand. So we would also request another $1.16 million. Talking about the marketing is just a critical component to all this. We want to ensure that, again, the community knows what we're doing and our riders understand how these services work and operate. So we'd like to request $300,000 for that, bringing our total pilot budget to a little over $3.1 million.
Beth?
I have a couple of questions. The first thing I was wondering if you could do for us, just so that everyone can understand it, tell us the difference between flex routes and microtransit.
Sure.
And define that a little bit. I think that would be great.
Yeah. I said before, we implemented those flex routes several years ago based upon agency need, and it was really actually a great service that we implemented. It is a fixed route service that may deviate on demand up to 3/4 of a mile with advance call-in and for an additional fee. That serves a lot of purposes for us. It allows us to provide a fixed route type service, but also the paratransit service in one mode. And it reduces costs for us, where ridership may not necessarily warrant fixed route service and paratransit service. As we've run that through the years, we've seen this may not be the right service for these areas. So when you talk about microtransit, which has several different terms out in their community, you may have heard it may be demand response transportation or mobility on demand. It is truly that. So we would provide a mobile phone app to our customers, much like you would see the private sector doing with transit network companies in our community, such as Uber or Lyft. And they would have the ability to request a UTA trip on demand, which would pick them up, not necessarily door to door, but we're looking at like a curb to curb. So it would require the customers to maybe walk a short distance to meet the vehicle because it becomes more effective. And then take those customers anywhere within a geofence zone that we've identified. And I'll go back to that so you can see that. Sorry, it's a little small, but you can see the blue area. That would be a virtual geofence to where the service will operate within that zone. And so our customers, again, once they made that request for a ride, they would have the technology would have algorithms that would match them with other customers and take them to a very close location to where their destination is. Again, we identified that the 3 rail stations are locations that will be used quite frequently. And then there is inter zone travel for local transit services. For us as a transit agency, we have the public good in mind, so we value those shared rides, so the technology will look to match as many trips as possible for customers that are also going to similar locations with similar origins. We provide an accessibility component too. So people with disabilities, they will have access to vehicles with lifts and wheelchair securement. And that's something that private sector is not offering today. So we, in essence, really begin to better serve our communities with this type of service. Sorry, that was a long answer, but I hope that was helpful.
I think that was great. And I just wanted to ask one other question. Is the pricing going to be similar to what the flex routes currently are? Would that be, or does the pilot make that different? How would that look?
Yeah, so I guess, let me tell you what I think our vision would be. And our vision would be, this is another mode of transportation. So our pricing should be a regular fare for this service that it would transfer to other modes of services. So in the ideal world, yes, I would say it's a $250 fare, which transfers to other modes or works with our other fare products. This is a pilot, and so we really would want to evaluate some potential discounts or promotions during the fair during the pilot to help people understand and try these services. And we really have to work with the technology. It's not entirely there yet to make it work with all of our different fare products. Cash payments become challenging. So we really have to do during the course of the pilot, work with our fares team and really say what is important and how do we want to make fares work as a new mode of service. So I think we'll need some trial, some time to try that out during the pilot program.
When are you going to know when you have to dip into the contingency funds? 70% contingency seems awfully high.
So
you got a 1.65 million request and then a contingency of 1.16. That's nearly 70% contingency.
Yeah.
When are you going to know when you have to dip into the contingency?
So first and foremost, so let me tell you that we've spoken with many transit agencies who've utilized the simulation services. They've all found value add in that and saying that the service performs much as expected or projected in the simulation services. So we're not necessarily expecting to dip into the contingency.
When will you know when you have to?
So we'll be watching the program on a regular basis, on a daily basis, and we'll know, because what the contingency is going to show is that we have higher demand than we projected. So if that number of 350 passengers per day starts to grow, and we may hit 400 passengers per day or 450, we're going to need to put more vehicles into service. And so as we're watching current service and we can start to project more, we would then start to have a better idea. So I don't know I can give you an exact time frame, but we would be watching this on a regular basis, and I think we'd be able to project if we can start putting more vehicles in service.
How often do you plan to come back and report these results to us?
I think this is a very important pilot for UTA. This changes how we could do things across the entire system for the future of this organization, and so it's important that the board knows what's going on with this program. If this is successful, we're going to want to do more of this service. So I think that we can come back on a fairly regular basis and update you with the status of this.
What do you mean by fairly regular basis?
I guess I could
monthly?
ask. We could do monthly. Does the board? Is there something the board would have an expectation
If this is
for?
a pilot and we're testing it out for 12 months, we probably ought to have some kind of a pretty regular report back. Here's what we forecast. Here's what what we're achieving. For the first 2 or 3 months, I would expect you're growing to that 350.
Yeah,
rather than you turn it on in the first month, you get 350 a day.
I think that's a fair assumption there.
I think it'll grow. It would be interesting to see the rate of that growth and how quickly you can achieve 350 and even beyond that. So I would like to see, but I'm a numbers guy. I like to see it monthly.
Well, what is a pilot program? It's critical we're evaluating and monitoring this program to make sure we have an understanding. And what's also great about it.
Does that mean you'd like to come back weekly?
I would love to come back on a monthly basis and give an update.
Thank you. At least monthly.
Yes, and more if necessary.
Thank you.
And I guess I'd like to highlight one last thing is this is a pilot, so it gives us the opportunity to make adjustments and improvements along the way. But we should also recognize as an agency is that this isn't successful. We may not want to continue it, and we may want to look at other ways of putting these services out there.
Thank you.
Yes.
And of course, there's a formal review when we do our budget. So this is going to cross 2 fiscal years, so there'll be a natural point to look at it when we're setting our tentative budget and then our final budget. So there's definitely 2 points 2 months apart where you'll get a chance to look at this later
I would
this
expect
year.
to see it more frequently than when we begin to do the budget in this.
Yeah, I'm just thinking formal. There'll be formal.
When does this actually kick off, Jared?
So we would like to launch it this fall. We're still trying to finalize what the best dates would be for us as an agency. We have a lot of service changes in August, so we're evaluating either the change day or maybe shortly after change day.
Jaron, and I think having some monthly updates will be helpful. As I've met with some of the local officials in this area and even in other areas, and we talked about this potential pilot, it is intriguing to a lot of the community, especially that aren't maybe as designed or inclined for historic transit modes. And
right.
And to stand it up, though, even by this end of the summer, and you're just beginning the procurement now, I understand.
Correct.
How optimistic are you that you could get something legitimately established and that firm could get drivers hired and familiarized and whatever else? I just wondered what are we optimistic about the actual stand-up time?
I think we are optimistic about the stand-up time. Recognizing a lot has to happen between today and this fall. It's why we're here right now. The next step for us is to get an RFP out, and we have to move fairly quickly because That's a hefty process, and we need to give a vendor time to stand up operations once we made a selection. But in conversation, there's several vendors out there who can do this. Most of them, as we just kind of learn about what they're capable of doing, believe that this time frame is realistic. So
They do.
we're optimistic, yes.
Okay, they're not laughing at you.
No,
Okay,
Not yet,
I
at
mean
least.
that from and obviously any vendor wants to be optimistic with you.
right.
I just know, when others have tried to stand up other kinds of services that they sometimes run into that. And I guess I'd rather get it started right than to get a false start. Especially if you're not necessarily married to the change day or something like that. And, as anxious as I'd love to see it work. And I remember in my old job meeting with the city of Bluffdale who wondered why UTA didn't love them. And I knew that was not the case. But I know there's some history there. But they're anxious to sort of figure out how they can connect into our network in some way. And so this strikes me as a great first step in that direction. So anyway, I think as you go through the procurement, it's important, I think, that you find the right vendor and then certainly that your timeframes are sort of sustainable such that, we can get a good service. I hate to get into a bad start.
So real quick, I agree it is an ambitious timeline, but I think this project team, and we do have a great project team who's been working on this internally. Should we run into challenges along the way, we would not want to do something that would jeopardize the success of this. So that is our goal. But as we get closer and there are challenges, we would come back and report on that.
Okay.
When would you expect to issue the RFP, and how long will you give for people to respond?
Yeah, so we're in the process of finalizing the RFP right now. So we're hopeful probably within the next 4 weeks would be my best guess.
You'll send it out?
Yes, and then it's a fairly complicated RFP as we're talking about what we're doing. So we want to make sure that vendors do have enough time to respond appropriately. So we'll probably be looking. Sorry, just off the top of my head, probably around the June timeframe, late May to June, till we're doing reviews and looking to select a vendor.
And then you'll come back and report to us as a result of that? Thank you.
I think we can give you a much more detailed update on this whole project then.
Great, thank you.
I have a question about the marketing. Who is going to handle that, the vendor or UTA?
So actually, we've been working with UTA right now, our marketing team, to put together a marketing plan. But the vendors have a lot of vested interest in seeing these programs succeed too. So we're going to be looking towards some sort of collaboration with the vendor to help with that marketing. So we'll probably put something in the RFP to say, to get a better understanding of how we can collaborate and do joint marketing efforts.
Structurally, is that a sufficient time? Again, talking about the time frame in general for a startup of like August or September, is that sufficient for the marketing to be effective, to make sure we're getting? I just wanted to get a feel for where we were thinking that would be effective.
So the team would love to do Change Day, but I think the message could get lost in that with so much happening in August. So honestly, I think as we're talking, we might look towards more September to October, just giving that we could use that time and then, be able to put a different message out there once Change Day's been completed, which gives us the time I think we need.
I would echo what I think has been already stated by Trustee Christensen and Millington, and that is, let's make sure we do this right and be thorough about it, and make sure that anything that dovetails with that, including the marketing, should be thoughtful, and we want to make sure that we're getting what we want out of that. So,
right. Okay.
Well, Jaron, it sounds like an exciting project, and we'll look back our staff will work with you to get those regular updates scheduled, and we wish you and the rest of the group well in that procurement process. So,
Great.
Steve, is there anything else that you to that one or to others that you needed to bring up?
No, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Next up are discussion items, and first up is our government relations and legislative priorities update with Matt Sybil. Matt, did you know the legislature ends on Thursday? But that's a shock to you. Blissful couple months.
I'm going to miss these weekly interactions with you. I mean, what are we going to do with ourselves, right? Good morning, trustees. Yes, there are about 36 hours left in the session. Although it's interesting to know that there's talk about leadership has apparently said that they want to end by 5 p.m. tomorrow. I'll believe it when I see it.
Leave it at 5 minutes to midnight.
Yeah, that's certainly that window between 5 p.m. and midnight. That's when all the wheeling and dealing happens. But let me just cover off a few things with you here. We can talk about appropriations in a minute. First off, SB 72, the big transportation governance and funding revision bill, passed both chambers. It's been enrolled and is just waiting for the governor to sign that. So I think we've talked that one to death, so we probably don't need to discuss that unless you have any other thoughts on it. SB 34, that's the affordable housing amendments by Senator Anderegg and Representative Potter. We've been involved with that one for over 6 months. Again, it reinforces the connection between moderate income, affordable housing, and public transportation. I think all three of you have been involved with that personally. I have to say, I think it's one of the reasons that there's been some inquiries by local elected officials looking at UTA TOD sites and the idea of raising the cap potentially. That won't happen this year, but there's been a lot of grassroots efforts to raise that cap, and we have communities coming to us asking to do joint venture TODs with them, so that's a positive thing. So much more to come next year with that particular topic. So both of those sponsors, as well as Representative Briscoe, attended last Friday. I think Trustee Holbrook, you were there for part of it. There was Housing Day in the Hill last Friday, so that's the Housing Coalition came together and talked about a lot of topics, and there's several bills going forward like SB 34. There was a news conference, and this bill got a lot of coverage, actually, a lot of positive coverage. The fiscal note with this bill is rather large. It's a $20 million one-time and then a $4 million ongoing. And as you may know, the appropriations process, the bill that came out yesterday, the appropriations bill, funds about another $300 million in appropriations requests, but it doesn't actually get to any of the bills that have a fiscal note with them. So that happens between now and midnight tomorrow night. So we'll wait to see on that one how much actually gets funded. I hear that it may not be 20 million, but it's certainly a good chunk of that. So that's a positive thing for us. Another bill just came out late yesterday, HB 495. That's related to tax reform, and so that one's formally called the Tax Restructuring and Equalization Task Force. So that establishes a task force made up mostly of legislators. That's right. And then, that's right. So they'll probably, I would imagine, appoint somebody from the Salt Lake Chamber and maybe from the League of Cities and Towns. We typically get involved at a working group level. So we'll meet with all of those groups kind of offline in kind of a steering committee, if you will. And that's been an effective way for us to engage. That repeals the Transportation and Tax Review Task Force. They're kind of done with their work. We've been involved with that for 2 years. There's been some media coverage about that. I think it actually has a pretty good fiscal note compared to some of the other task forces that are out there. But essentially, their goal is to they want to do a lot of outreach and then get a tax bill through a special session sometime this fall, most likely. So before next year's session. And again, we'll engage on that, and we're typically asked to participate at a working group level. That's a good thing for us. And I think we got ahead of the game this year we worked with bond counsel. If sales tax on is going to change and our base is reduced, but it's widened on services, we want to make sure to keep Bob Biles and the bond counsel happy in life, right? Content. Maybe I'll switch to appropriations for a minute, if that's okay. So again, the bill that came out about 5 o'clock yesterday was 300 million or so more husky, I guess, than the original skinny budget from the day before. So it's going to change, though. Like I said, there were very few ongoing appropriations. One of the ongoing appropriations that was in that list was one of ours. So the $70,000 a year, that technology platform that the mobility management groups, Ryan Taylor, Christy Allen have been working on. That's a great thing. Currently, there's nothing in there relating to Point of the Mountain or the Vineyard front-runner double tracking. But again, that's going to change. So it's very fluid for the next 36 hours. Another bill that has yet to be funded is HB 353. That's the Briscoe bill with the rather clunky title, Reduction of Single Occupancy Vehicle Trips Pilot Program. That's the up to 17 days of free fares. I've heard a lot that that's going to get funded most likely at a reduced level, but there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm around that topic. And some of it was spurred, I think, by the work that we did as an agency with the 4 sponsors a couple of weeks ago for the 2 free fare days. So that's a positive thing. And then maybe the last thing I'll talk about before taking any questions that you might have is there's been a lot of media coverage on if there's going to be a bonding bill. And I heard late last night that the appetite for that is waning, especially now there's a kind of a deal on the House and Senate for the appropriations process. There'll likely be some tailored things in there that relate to projects that have a direct connection to a repayment mechanism, like through the TIF funds, or the state sales tax that goes mainly towards roads. So there's some parking structures that relate to transit locations that are in that, and I think those will actually survive, but there's not likely to be a massive $1 billion plus bonding bill. So, why don't I leave it at that and just take any other thoughts or insights you might have?
Questions from either Kent or Beth? No, thanks for your, to you and Michelle and Sam and Steve Hunter. And Bob, I think, I've decided Bob's job for 45 days is to do fiscal notes, but and that's a lot of work and a lot of response by everybody to try to make sure our needs are at least identified and kept. But so we certainly thank you for your efforts there. So do we have any sense, and I guess you probably don't have any greater insight when they might actually be at a place where they're going to stop? Is that meaning stop and actually have the deal done, whatever it is? I mean, does somebody say it'll be out today or it won't be out till tomorrow at noon? Or
yeah, I think to give you some sense, I mean, last year the final appropriations bill came out. I think it was 11:35 p.m.
Oh,
so
on Thursday.
Not quite at the stroke of midnight on Thursday night, but yeah.
Just be ready to vote for it then.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then it's a mad scramble to actually see what's in it and decipher all the language. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks. We'll stay tuned and certainly welcome to. We're happy to help you wherever you see a need. Then. So thanks, man. Our next item up for discussion is part 2 of our 3-part series on the future of Frontrunner, and have Steve Meyer, Bruce Carden, and Carrie Doan with us today. And I'll go back to Steve. Do you want to introduce anything on this particular segment before we turn to the other 2?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Last week we talked about the Central Wasatch Corridor study, and that really helped demonstrate some of the purpose and need for making improvements to FrontRunner. Recall that showed that the highway system alone, the freeway system, could not accommodate all the north-south traffic demand in the corridor. And so that, talks to us, says to us we should look at improvements to what we can do with FrontRunner. And concurrently with that study, UTA had a consultant on board, LTK, that performed this future FrontRunner study looking at what the options were. We were very interested at the time as to what the implications were of positive train control as we implemented that, what impact that would have on our operations. We were just learning about that as we were doing the implementation of PTC along with this study. So it was timely to have the consultant on board to help model those scenarios and see what the impacts are. That has helped guide us as we move forward. But then looking at what can we do to improve reliability by some strategic double tracking, as well as long-term improving travel times, increasing ridership by increasing capacity by greater frequency or longer trains, or even changing the propulsion method from diesel to electric. So I'll turn the time over to Carrie and Bruce to talk through the findings of the study.
Welcome. I don't know which one is going to lead off here, but we're anxious to hear your report.
Thank you, Steve and Chair and Trustees. I'm Carrie Doan, the Manager of Long Range and Strategic Planning. Very happy to be able to talk to you about the study that we performed. We being Bruce and his team and planning, it was a great collaborative effort, which is something I'd like to highlight. I do this. Great. So we're going to go through a little presentation that's going to cover the scope and the overview. And there were a number of scenarios, which we'll try to describe to you, and then the results, basically. And we have a couple of key takeaways that we can discuss in the end. Piggybacking on what Steve was talking about last week's presentation by Jeff Harris, the Wasatch Central Corridor study was a regional effort, and it was multimodal in its aspects and considerations, but it always sort of went right to double tracking and electrification. There was no in between. That was one of the solutions to be added to the scenarios that they had, and heavily relying on free fare too in terms of the results of that study.
Carrie, can I ask a question on
yes.
that piece of it? Is that just because that was the scope of that study and they weren't able to drill down? I mean, in the idealist circumstance, you'd go from status quo to that, but was there a recognition at the time that there probably are things in between? Or
I think to some degree, I was not the project manager, nor did I attend all the meetings of that study, but my understanding is that it was a large group that came upon those evaluation criteria that Jeff presented, and it was all about sort of what can we do as a region, and everything being considered. And I think that from a transit perspective, there were other bus solutions that were also included, but the FrontRunner jumped right to double track. I think Bruce has something he'd like to add.
I think that one of the things that Jeff pointed out last week is that it's really focused on the demand and how do you fulfill that demand. And you have choices between, building double-deck highways and those kinds of things. And I think that the focus on things like free fare, how do you incentivize people using transit? And they also had in that charging pricing for peak use of the roads, and so it's a balance of looking at what the demand is going to be in the future and recognition that there's just no way to fill that demand given what we have today between the roads and transit.
Okay, thank you.
Big steps to solve big travel demand issues. Yeah. So, any other questions about last week's presentation? Because this week we wanted to focus on our study, The Future of FrontRunner. We had it printed. It's a beautiful piece of work, in my opinion. But it Yeah, right. So in here, there's a lot of detailed results from a simulator that LTK has. But we started with existing conditions, and they modeled our system exactly how it is with signaling systems and exact switches, and it's very exacting. And we wanted to get a sense of the positive train control and how that was going to impact operations. So we did that. And then again, being responsive to the front Central Corridor study and other community issues and desires that we'd been hearing about. But Bruce's team had immediate needs. And so we said, so how do we get to a double track electrification from where we are today? So this study tries to fill in those gaps. And so we thought about a phased sort of implementation of investments to get us there. I want to make sure I check my notes. Oh, the simulation software was called TrainOps, and this was to make sure that whatever we're proposing is operationally feasible, as opposed to a travel model that really can't do that. But speaking of the travel model, it was used to determine the ridership benefits. And I don't know how much you know about the regional travel model, and I won't go into the details, but there are particular aspects about the travel model that are great, but there are limitations. And we've mentioned a couple of them here in this slide. That is, the travel model, when it attracts riders to a service, whether it's front runner, tracks, bus, anything, it's not super sensitive to like really small changes in travel time. It will be for larger travel time changes, but something that might happen with just better reliability, it's just not that sensitive to it. So it was our best tool to forecast ridership. My modeling friends say it's not an estimate, it's a forecast. It's just what went into the model is a forecasting an option of ridership in the future. So the study itself was done by a consultant. We had a limited budget. We couldn't just keep modeling anything we wanted, so we needed to define 5 particular scenarios. And this is a little graphic that shows them with the name of the scenario on the left side and then kind of what was included in each scenario. Positive train control, we knew we had to do in everything. The low investment scenario, remember, we wanted to do phased investments. So kind of what is a lower investment scenario and what would that entail? We knew Vineyard Station was coming on board, and the Payson extension has been in the MAG phase 1 RTP in the adopted RTP that they have. So we included Vineyard Station and phase 1. And then the next station we wanted to see, scenario that we wanted to see, what does increasing frequency do? So we modeled a 15-minute service. And we'll go into the details of some of the things that you probably can't read on the left here. But just what's included, the information between the medium and the high investment scenario is really about electrification. So you can see the only thing that changed there is electrifying the system. We really wanted to see the difference between diesel operation and electric. And the last scenario, we kind of had to go all in. We didn't have enough budget to do multiple more scenarios and trying to check all the individual stations. So we put it all in adding stations, which is something that we'd been hearing from our partners. And Bruce, go ahead.
Can you go back to that?
Sorry,
just really
of course.
Quickly? Thank you. In the 2030 low investment scenario, the second one down, it says it adds double track to help with reliability issues. Is it just double track on the Vineyard and the Payson? Where is that double track at?
We're going to get to that. It's
okay.
10 miles of double track throughout the system. That's a good question, and we will get to that. Okay. Any others on this slide?
So in that scenario, I mean, on the 15-minute headways, it sounds like, and I guess and again, I realize you'll get to it, but just to sort of reset my mind, you don't necessarily have to have double track through the whole corridor. You just have to have it in key places along the corridor.
Correct. But this study, I'd like to say, confirmed that for us. Of course, that's what we thought, but that's exactly what we intended to do to determine where we needed double track in order to get to 15-minute service and then ultimately to electrification as well.
Okay. All right.
So a little bit more detail on the differentiation of each of the scenarios. With the baseline PTC modeling, it basically continues to run the service that we're running today. And with 3 Bombardier bi-level cars and the 1 single-level Comet car running the same type of service, but with the PTC implications included. The low investment, what that does is it gets us to add 1 more car to the train. So instead of a 4-car train, actually a 5-car train. We had to make some choices about whether those 5 cars would be all bi-level or whether we would continue to use some Comet cars. And based on limited choices, we just opted to look at moving to all bi-level vehicles for that low investment scenario. It includes 10 miles of double track and 17 miles of extended track to Payson. So that is what is included in that, continuing to have 30-minute headways in the peak and 60-minute headways in the off-peak. So no added service to that, just adding a little bit of capacity with an additional car. The medium investment continues to use a diesel locomotive pulling 6 bi-level cars and adds an additional 46 miles of double track, and includes that Payson extension, but gets us to that 15-minute headways, where essentially you're more than doubling your capacity by coming every 15 minutes during the peaks instead of every 30 minutes. And then finally, as we get into the electrification scenarios, the high investment is that same track, but you'll notice that with electrification, it actually reduces the amount of required double track to operate with an electrified system. And this is where we had assumed that you would go a progressive start with adding some capacity, then and then go to electrification longer term. This is one key indicator that may suggest that skipping the medium investment and going straight to the long-term investment may have some long-term cost benefits that we could reduce some of the initial double tracking in order to get there. And then finally, the last scenario, and when you look at it, it has 8-car EMU electric multiple units. The seating capacity is similar to 6 bi-levels. And so the difference between the medium and the high investment isn't increasing necessarily capacity in each train. It's just increasing, it's just a different mode of operation. You can essentially fit 8 multiple units in a similar size as the 6 bi-levels with a locomotive.
Bruce, do you, when you get to 6 cars on a diesel scenario, does the diesel start and stop in the same kind of time frame?
We have a slide coming up that addresses that exact issue. That's the perfect question to ask. It's the why behind electrification, is that that ability to accelerate much more quickly and decelerate as well.
Yeah. Okay.
So the next slide. Any other questions about the scenarios and kind of what was modeled there? The next slide talks about a charrette that we did looking at the full 83 miles of corridor that we currently run, and asking the question, what is easy to double track and what is difficult to nearly impossible? And so you'll see that we categorized into several. Purple means that it's currently double track. So our current system has about 21, almost 22 miles of double track or sidings where trains can pass each other. The blue is, so blue essentially says this is extremely easy to double track. We likely already own the property. It may even be graded to accept additional track. There's not a whole lot of that. There's about 10 miles that that is quite easy to build. Now, easy doesn't necessarily mean it's not expensive. Even the blue, we're looking with the estimates for the Vineyard double tracking. Some of that is blue, and they're still estimating that close to $5 million per mile to double track. And so it's even the easy stuff is expensive. So when you get into some of the difficult, and the red is a relatively small amount of track, about 2.5, close to 3 miles of areas where, in some ways, you look at that as you do that when there is a major highway build, and so. And that is most of what those pinch points, those red pinch points are, is where we have pillars for highways that to move a pillar, you're moving the highway and you're taking the highway down to put it back up. Some people call that the after the earthquake sections. So that kind of gives you the different levels of difficulty in doing the double track. We had a great group that came together, folks from the environmental, folks from planning, from operations, from capital, and real estate group as well, to come together and look at this and put as many minds in the room that we could to ask questions about the sections of double track.
Go ahead.
Okay.
And then I'll ask.
So my question to you is, with the red scenario and the taking down of a highway type of scenario, where are those located?
So the next slides.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent questions.
Yes.
And the great minds in the room, and mostly because some of the state money potentially will come through UDOT. Was UDOT in the room? Did they follow how you got to your conclusions?
They weren't in the room as part of this process.
Okay.
However, they have looked at it, and we have a few people at UDOT that either used to work at UTA or we have great relationships. And when we presented this to them, they said, hey, let's look at this and see when those highways are scheduled to be.
So that's on their radar screen.
It is.
If I may just add, they weren't part. They weren't part of the double track feasibility, but they were part of our stakeholder group. We did meet with stakeholders that included UDOT, and it was at one of those meetings when they say, hey, we ought to get together and determine what projects we have that we may be able to coordinate. And that is now happening not as we speak, but I've had 2 meetings so far with them. We have one in Region 3 coming up.
I just think the more they can be bought into, or push back and have those conversations now, only helps us, as we sort of had the, Matt gave us the bad news of no bonding bill, but, there was a scenario in that at one point that had a potentially huge chunk of money coming to commuter rail, and clearly I think they want to get there. So the more we can work those and be in sync in that message, I think is going to be really important.
Yes, in spite of the fact that we feel like this was a great group of minds, it's not an engineering level look at it. And as they're doing the engineering for the Vineyard double tracking, it was not an exact science, and they're identifying things where it's less difficult or more difficult than we had assumed. Okay. And so there is a next need to do a much more defined engineering look at, and that will help us. As I think one of the first priorities is going to be corridor preservation, and the more we understand these aspects, the better that project will be to clearly say, this is what we need, and let's work to acquire that. The longer you wait to acquire, the more expensive it's going to be.
Steve, I heard the noise coming from your end.
Yes.
Comment.
Yeah, thank you. I just say that the coordination with UDOT happened from day one on the build of the projects. On the North project from Ogden to Salt Lake, we have about 13 miles where we're adjacent to I-15. And they coordinated with us during that construction and then saw the need, as even back in the 2006, 2008 timeframe, of coordinating future improvements along I-15 in Davis County with us, and what we needed for expansion and what UDOT needed for expansion. So there was a very detailed study done on that segment of roadway. It just went segment by segment and said, here's where UDOT needs to shift lanes or widen. Here's where UTA needs room for double track. How would we accommodate that, whether it was one of us giving on right-of-way or retaining walls or things like that. So they've been a great partner, and we continue to work with them to address these issues. So it's an ongoing process for us.
Great, thank you.
So these next slides, clearly you can't read the detail on these, but what this is 3 miles. So the top left basically is beginning at Provo Station, and so you come across and you get up to basically American Fork is the beginning of the next line. And so we have, I think, 3 pages of these slides that show the whole alignment. And so what you'll see here is anything that's purple on the top line is currently double track. The next line down is the low investment scenario. Then it goes to the medium investment and the high, and then the high with infill. So that's that stacked set. And so what that's assuming is that if it turns purple in the next line, that's where double tracking needs to take place in each of those scenarios. So what you'll notice, we've circled a few spots, and the first circle is an example where there's a section of double track that is needed in the medium investment, but it's not needed in the high investment. So that's a section of double track where electrification essentially makes that section less helpful. You'll see on the second line, and this is near Lehigh, it's a section of double track that is orange, and so it's difficult, it's expensive, it's going north of Lehigh, and yet it's in the low investment scenario. So unfortunately, we couldn't just build where it's easy and get where we need to go. There are some more expensive sections of track and more difficult sections of track that are needed in the short term, not just looking out at the long term. Next page here, again, we're continuing north. This is essentially, the Draper South Jordan area. Again, you'll see a circled area on the top right. It's another section of orange that was identified as needed in the low investment scenario. You'll see you can see kind of where these red sections are, and with a little bit more detail. The first red section on the top line, that is the flyover where we change from being on the east side of Union Pacific, where we go up over Union Pacific, and we're now operating on the west side. So a flyover structure to double track that section is considered red because of expense and difficulty in doing that. And we could go into detail on what each of these others are.
On something like a flyover, would we have the right of way? It's just the cost of the structure, or is it that we'd have to get the right of way?
It's likely some of each.
Okay.
Yes, there's likely in most of these red scenarios that we would need right of way. And some of the orange sections, the reason that it got to orange, for example, is that there isn't a easily available track on our side of the corridor, but there is on UP's side of the corridor. And so the additional cost is that we would have to both purchase the right-of-way and move UP over in order to double track those sections. So then this is the last slide going all the way to Ogden, showing again that detail of what's needed in each scenario for double tracking.
Any questions on what we call the rainbow maps?
No, although I'd love to have a set, just whether I keep it in my office or someplace just to look at them.
Yes, of course. We are going to make the whole study available, and these maps are in the study in the book. But we can blow these up because it's still a bit of a challenge. The graphics aren't connected electronically as much as we'd like, so it's been a bit of a challenge, kind of working the rainbow map onto the track itself. Although we have engaged in a GIS exercise here with Summer and Alex in our office, as well as UDOT has been helping actually put it on GIS. So we do have that available. It won't be quite as static as you see here, but we can get you anything you need to look at that.
That sounds great.
I have a question actually on the previous slide, and it had sat in the back of my mind for a second, but Salt Lake Sighting, am I reading that right? I'm sorry if I can't see that right. Where exactly is that south? I'm just trying to get it.
1700
okay.
south in that area.
Okay, thank you.
That's definitely an earthquake situation. There's all sorts of piers kind of in and out and everywhere around there. It's really hard. Okay, so moving on. These are more results, getting kind of right to the capital costs. We did a sort of a unit cost analysis, and our consultant was able to kind of determine quantities of things like signals and double track and stations, multiple line items for the cost estimates. And we aggregated them into these two categories, infrastructure and fleet costs. And we added a contingency knowing that the cost estimates, as Bruce was saying before, were not engineered cost estimates. We did want to get a scale. So you can see on the totals with a contingency, the prices. I want to make one point here. There was, in our very final policy meeting, a point was brought up that the future PTC, the low investment, and the medium investment scenario costs used to be lower than what are presented here, or we presented to them a lower cost. And it was well, what about the fleet costs of those scenarios? Wouldn't we have to replace the diesel fleet? And that was exactly right. This is a 2050 analysis, so by 2050 we'd have to replace our diesel fleet. So any scenario that we're talking about in 2050 would require a replacement of our diesel fleet. And that helped us kind of equalize the comparison with an electric scenario, which you had to buy a whole new fleet for anyway. Does that make sense? So these numbers include the future PTC, the low investment and the medium investment scenarios include replacing our diesel fleet, as well as in the case of the medium investment, adding fleet for the 15-minute service.
What about, and maybe it's in the figures, but the operation of diesel fuel versus electricity, and sort of the ongoing piece, is that at all in these scenarios?
Not very well. The honest truth is, we're mostly looking at capital costs and the infrastructure, the investment that would be needed. But it's a great point, and there's electrical costs as well. When we have a light rail system, I mean, it runs fairly similarly to our light rail system, with the catenary and the substations and the coal-fired power plant someplace out in the desert as well.
There are mixed, and this study didn't really get into the operational impacts, but as we look at others who are in the process of electrifying or have electrified in the past, and we've asked them the question, from an operating perspective, there's mixed results. In some cases, electrification has saved cost. In other cases, it hasn't. It's been similar. I haven't talked to anyone where they said the operating costs went up significantly with electrification. So we've seen about the same or less.
I see. But not maybe a lot less, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I just think, obviously there's a lot of factors to work through, but I think as we, between both an air quality component and long-term the maintenance operational side, I think the fleet replacement one clearly makes sense. And it's interesting, like, how do you turn one off and one off and one on the same day? And I don't know if anybody thought that one through, but I mean.
So fortunately, Caltrain is currently going through an electrification process.
So they're making all the
we
mistakes
are
for us.
paying close attention to that and learn, as you say, from their experience.
Yeah. I guess the diesel will run on an electric track.
Yes, and that is one of the potential advantages of going straight to electrification, is that you can continue to operate your diesel fleet in that corridor and gradually add the electric fleet, both as an initial investment and then as a replacement of the diesel when those get to the end of their life. So you aren't necessarily stuck with saying, okay, we've got to sell all of our diesels in order to go electric. You can have a staged implementation.
And we may at some point, and I not to delay you, but should do some kind of an analysis of sort of when your fleet retirement. I know you're overhauling some now to try to improve performance, and they're just kind of at that point in their lives. But sort of what that transitional plan could look like, and at some point Bob will want to say, and does it fit into our finances, or what's the gap? And I think, we heard that a little bit actually as we met with legislators. Is I think we have to be able to articulate, here's our gap, and the more that we have some of this stuff, I think it will help them say, here's how do we get to this electric piece. And I realize this is a lot of work, and you're certainly not going to do it in a few months or even a year. But I think as we get to getting them to invest in parts of the system, that being able to articulate that story would be really helpful.
Yes, and I think we are at one of those decision points right now where decisions that we make today in regards to the Comet cars is going to have impact on that long-term path that we're choosing. There are, of course, advantages and disadvantages of overhauling versus replacing with used versus replacing with new cars. And so that analysis, I think, is going to be important with that long view, looking at what are the impacts of the decisions that we make today in terms of both flexibility and capability going forward with the different scenarios.
I had a question, just to clarify again. I think I know the answer, but the whole premise, including the 2050 high investment with infill stations, is based on 8 cars that are electrified, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions on the costs? This slide is intended to kind of give an overview of the ridership benefits, and it's split between the frontrunner itself and the regional trips, and it shows the kind of the increases by percentage. And the big takeaway here is like the big jump between the low investment and the medium investment in both the frontrunner ridership as well as the regional transit trips, basically saying you get the biggest ridership bang for your increased frequency buck, if that's a sentence. That's not surprising in transit, especially, and I'm going to go back to the travel model again. The travel model really will pick up on increased frequency as an attractive service, so it will attract more riders to a service that's more frequent. So that's really consistent with our travel model. But that's not to say that you don't get some bump in going from the medium to the high. And there's a travel time slide coming up that will show that there is a improved travel time between the medium investment and the high investment scenario, which it does provide some bump in the ridership. And then again, adding stations is a smaller increase in ridership as well. Questions on ridership? So this slide is you have it in your packet because it's difficult to see. And I'm going to apologize. There's a note that goes with this slide that basically says 900 additional riders. So this is the high investment with infill stations, and it's intended to show all the scenarios at each of the stations. I need to explain a couple of things. First of all, you'll notice that North Temple and Salt Lake are together, Salt Lake Central and North Temple. The model, for some reason, does not distinguish those two stations very well, and when we separate them, it doesn't calibrate very well to what we actually have. So we put them together as sort of a destination. So I think that's more accurate with respect to each scenario. This is showing our new stations at Sunset, or infill stations at Sunset, Centerville, and Bluffdale. The ridership bars, there's just a blue bar because it only came in one scenario. But I'd like you if you can look carefully at the adjacent stations. So in Sunset's case, look at Roy and Clearfield. The blue bar is a little bit below the, the purple bar, which is the high investment to the high investment with infill, which means that the new stations take some ridership from adjacent stations, but not all of it. And the note that's missing that this is an increase in ridership of 900 riders between Ogden and Provo. And then the other point to show here is that the ridership demand at the extensions is pretty small relative to the stations between Ogden and Provo. The other thing you can see
are those perimeter sort of riderships, are they, how much are they taking into account, or are they entirely taking into account growth projections in those areas?
So again, we're going to go back to a little travel model, sort of education. There's a socioeconomic and land use assumption that goes into the travel model that includes household size and car ownership and incomes and things like that. And it really does depend on what goes into the model. These runs come from a model that has been revised, and I think MAG has changed some of their land use and demographic projections on the southern end of Utah County, which may change that. Yeah. The other thing that I think is important to remember, the travel model uses the operating characteristics that you put in. And with these sort of low, more rural stations, there was some suggestion that there's not a demand to run 15-minute service. Remember, we're at 15-minute service now all day down to Payson. So the team made a decision to kind of assume these extensions more like a shuttle, where you run a number of trips each day, each morning and each night, more than we used to do to Pleasant View, but not every 15 minutes. So the travel model picks up on that too, so it attracts fewer riders. So those two things combined would be some indication, but we don't have the densities there. I mean, everything's working kind of together. Did you have a question, Beth?
I do, thanks. When you mentioned, Pleasant View and the challenges with that, can I just ask a question in terms of the assumption of when you would run those like shuttle times, and would those be peak only? Because I know that was the challenge with Pleasant View.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks. Good question. I knew of the challenges and some of the reasons why people didn't find the Pleasant View service very useful with respect to I can't get to work on time, and then the amount of time that I'm in Salt Lake has to be not even a full day, blah, blah, blah. So we made sure that we provided enough trips. Yes, it's peak, but there are 4 trips each way, and the time between the last trip in the morning and the first trip in the afternoon was much reduced than what we had for Pleasant View. It was like, I'm thinking 5 or 6 hours. And so it was an extended shuttle system, yes, in the peak, but but a broader peak than we provided to Pleasant View. Does that answer your question? Any other questions on station ridership? So this slide is somewhat of a summary slide, and we bring in one final variable, and I want to talk about that mostly, and that is the reliability. The simulation software does a number of things. It simulates the actual operating conditions. It adds the double track where we needed it, but it also attempted to have the service operate at 95% reliable. And our consultants, did all they could to make that happen, but we found in the diesel scenarios that was very difficult to get to that 95% reliability. So we chose to just report the reliability measures that the software was reporting with the diesel scenarios. And as you can see, they're challenging. And we're going to have the slide about the diesels is coming up, but this is also an indication of the slowness of the diesel operation. It's just a challenging, especially when you're pulling 6 cars, to go fast enough to stay reliable with any sort of double tracking. But as soon as you go to electrification, your reliability improves drastically. The ridership numbers and the cost numbers you've seen before, but we put this together, and I think we provided this for you as a slide in your packet. Questions on reliability or anything else?
One of the things to note also, as you look at the ridership, so currently we're carrying, if we look over the last 6-10 months, we're averaging about 19,000 riders per day. So the baseline scenario with essentially adding no capacity, the demand is up at 35,000. And then with just adding 1 car and going from 4 cars to 5 cars, essentially a 25% increase in capacity. They're projecting more than 100% increase in demand. And so the demand is greater than capacity in these 2 scenarios. And so this study doesn't solve the fact that we already have challenges with capacity today. We find that we start having people stand at 75% of seated load. So when you have 500 seats on a train and you get to 400 people and people are going to be standing, and our peak trips today are pushing 90% capacity at our peak trip in the peak direction. So what that says is that we have issues today about capacity in the next 4 to 5 years that we can't wait till 2030 to address.
Other questions?
I had a question on, and I apologize, can you kind of define for me again how the 2050 medium investment actually decreases reliability? I'm kind
it's
of
operated with diesel locomotive versus.
Okay.
So two slides from now.
Let's do this slide.
So this is a slide that shows the time that it takes to get up to speed, or the distance that it takes. So the first line to the left is an electric 8-car unit. So an electric 8-car unit can get up to 79 miles per hour basically in 4,000 feet. Now this graph isn't to scale, and so you look at our current, which is the next line to the right from the first line, it's a green line. That is our current configuration of diesel locomotive with 1 single level and 3 bi-levels. And essentially that takes over 10,000 feet to get up to 79 miles per hour. So it's that kind of helps to quantify carrying an 8-car EMU versus what we run today. you get up to speed in 4,000 feet versus close to 11,000 feet.
And the medium investment scenario is the slowest line there. The diesel locomotive with 6 bilevels, so it takes
over 18,000 feet to get up to speed for that 6 cars. So that's where, even with more double track than the electrification scenario, you just lose so much ability to recover from any type of slowdown. You lose the ability to get up and maintain a high rate of speed.
And if you imagine, remember, the medium investment is 15-minute service, so there's trains both directions every 15 minutes. So the single track sections have to be able to be passed in 7.5 minutes, or probably even less, because of acceleration and deceleration. And so those single track sections have to become shorter and shorter when the train is slower. Does that make sense?
So if we go back to the last slide, it's basically looking at the travel time comparison for each of the scenarios. So you'll see the medium investment scenario has the longest travel time, but on that last slide you saw that it also has the lowest reliability. So this again is part of motivation from an operating perspective to, when we go to 15-minute headways, to go to electrification directly rather than go to,
I think a point to make here is that the simulation software needed a schedule, because we still didn't allow the trains to leave earlier than a schedule, but LTK had a scheduler on the project, and they were able to kind of force a schedule that would work for the medium investment scenario, and that's the time you see added here in the medium investment.
So when we were about halfway through the study, we did a tour with some elected officials, and we had the question, what, you mean you're going to make this investment and not decrease travel time? That last slide, even with electrification, travel time is longer than it is today. And so the question is, what would it take to significantly reduce travel time? And the answer to that is try to get to fully double track. Our light rail system is that way now, where you have double track throughout the system. And so when one train is delayed, it just doesn't have the cascading impact on other trains. Whereas this system, even with these investments, has some of that still. And so the question was asked, and we had already kind of exhausted our 5 scenarios with the consultant, but we asked them to do a high-level look at what would happen if we double-tracked the whole system, and what would that do to reliability and to travel time. And also, what would happen if we increased our top speed from 79 to 90 miles per hour. We can do that with only minor alteration to some of our signaling and those kinds of things. It isn't until you get up to 110, 125 that you have to do some significant investment in grade separation and some of those kinds of things. And so they did a quick look at that, and the result by double tracking the whole system is almost a half-hour reduction in end-to-end travel time, which is significant. And as we look out to attracting additional riders, there's a certain group of people who won't ride it until it truly is comparable or less than what it takes them to drive on the freeway. One of the things that they found is that added or that decrease in travel time had a lot more to do with the double track and not meeting than it did getting up to 90 miles per hour. That extra 10 miles per hour, 11 miles per hour doesn't have, over the whole 83 miles, only had a 3-minute difference in travel time. So we already are, our top end speed is good for the corridor and the frequency of stops that we make. and again, this was a back of the napkin kind of analysis by the consultant, but they expected at least a 96% on-time performance, and that was the low end. With complete double tracking, they felt that could be potentially even higher. The other benefit, this gets to where some operational benefits can come in, is that it required 20 trains in peak service to do this with the diesel locomotives, but even with the electric locomotives. But by reducing the travel time, you can turn trains around faster, and you actually only need 17 trains instead of 20 trains to run that 15-minute service all day. And so there is essentially a 15% reduction in operating cost by doing that. So there are some cost benefits related to reducing travel time if you can actually take the capital cost of those extra trains and the operating cost of added crews required to operate the slower trains. However, it's hard to know exactly what that is. So this is that same travel time graph looking at on the right the full double track, essentially from Provo to Ogden, is about an hour and 46 minutes or so. So, in terms of the major takeaways from the study, first of all is that the biggest way to increase demand for ridership is to increase frequency. When people get to the point where they don't need to look at a schedule to ride the train and they just know, okay, there's going to be a train in 15 minutes, you get a significant increase in ridership just based on that convenience factor of, if I just miss my train, it's only a 15-minute wait versus 30 minutes or an hour in off-peak times. Electrification is key for reliability and potentially has some cost savings in terms of double tracking. Travel time benefits with the electrification also increases ridership, but again, the model not having that clear impact of reliability, it didn't show as much of a ridership boost as we know there would be. If you're operating at 85% on time versus 93% on time, there are going to be people that will choose not to ride with lower reliability. So, clearly the higher investment scenario has the best ridership, but also the highest cost. That's the cost benefit analysis needs to be done at a higher level than this study to really get into the details of what that looks like. And really the bottom line on the infill stations, the benefit of adding stations at those three sites, Centerville, Sunset, and Bluffdale, had a relatively small increase in ridership. And there are some negative impacts on ridership because it increases travel time by adding additional stops. So those, again, would need to be looked at much more detail on a case-by-case basis when making the decision about adding stops. There are always trade-offs when you do that.
Question?
This has been super helpful. My mind's just going with a lot of things, and I know there's another section left, and I'm sure there will be many more discussions to come, but this was really helpful.
Chair?
Yes, Steve.
Just a couple comments. This isn't in our funded plan.
Yeah.
Right, currently in Wasatch Front and Mountain Lands 2040 plans, all there is in Mountain Land plan, I think, in both plans is some corridor preservation in the funded plans. We're not proposing to divert any funding from existing service or any of the fourth quarter funds towards this. We'd be, looking to our partners to help us find opportunities for additional resources to do this. think it's important to note that you go back to that central Wasatch Corridor study, there is a common need for people moving capacity here, and this study kind of responds to addressing how we could meet that need from the transit side. And so that's where we're at right now. Don't want anybody to think that that we're proposing to move forward without additional resources for this.
No, I think that's a good clarification. I think the more we can, answer some of the questions in the operational long-term benefits or challenges, I think it just helps as we go to ask for additional dollars. And I think, UTA, amongst other parties, have concurred that, maybe future investments as opposed to in an I-15 corridor, other than maintenance, might be in something like this. And I think the more we have those answers, the better off we'll be to respond to it. But this has been great, and I think your point's well taken, Steve. Well,
Steve, I put one more slide on. We did present this to our policy committee, and it kind of wraps us back to the Wasatch Front Central Corridor study. And I think what we're talking about in terms of capacity in a corridor. And this was supposed to kind of give an idea of how FrontRunner can sort of be a partner in moving people through the I-15 corridor in particular. These are congested freeway lane numbers that we got from UDOT. And the two different colors, the blue bars are kind of your commuter style, trying to get everybody in seats. The red bars is if there's, special event, people are happier standing. But you can see that we can get up to 2 freeway lanes worth of people in the train. And this is capacity, not the travel demand forecasted ridership.
Yeah. That's super. That's a great slide. Well, thank you. And thanks, Bruce and Carrie. And we're going to just take a short 5-minute break and begin at 3 after the hour. Just let people use the restroom if they need to, and then we'll come back for our last item. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, it looks like we're back, and we're last but not least August Change Day, and we have Eric Callison, and then I have Andrea Pecker, who's going to present on this. This is really our first, so we may have a few introductory questions, but take it away.
So it's probably a good thing you took a break before we started this presentation, because I'm about to fill your heads with a lot more knowledge. That's a shot of my whiteboard in my office. I may appear calm on the outside, but this is always going on the inside. So we've broken it up into some larger headings just for the purposes of clarity. We don't want to go through every single route individually, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about individual routes as we go through the presentation. But kind of one of the biggest catalysts for change this August is the Salt Lake City Transit Master Plan initial implementation that has allowed us to make additional changes in Salt Lake County to improve connections and get us closer to the gridded system that we want, making some modifications to service the state capital. We have Prop 1 money in Tooele County that we have not spent yet on operations. We've been spending it on other things that we would like to channel into increased service. We have some new service in Ogden and other areas in Weber County that's also part of Prop 1 implementation that we are still phasing with them, and some changes in northern Utah County. I also have a slide about the microtransit pilot, but I won't go into that since you've already heard more detail on that than I was prepared to share. But we'll just go through the presentation. Please feel free to ask any questions. The way that these slides are set up is it has the initial, the current configuration, and then the new configuration. So I might switch back and forth between those a couple of times as I'm explaining this. So as you know, Salt Lake City has secured funding for us to increase the level of transit service within their city limits. The three routes that we're going to begin this implementation on is routes 2, 9, and 21. So this is how they currently look. And then this is the new configuration. Routes 2 and 21 don't change substantially in terms of their alignment. Route 9 does get extended over onto the west side of the city. There's another slide that's more explicit about those west side connections. Also, that the level of service will be increased on these routes to run every 15 minutes Monday through Saturday, also to run from 5 a.m. to midnight Monday through Saturday, and then 30-minute service on Sundays from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Currently, Route 9 does not run on Saturday or Sunday, Route 2 does not run on Sunday, and Route 21 does not run until midnight. So this is a significant, none of them run until midnight currently, but this is a significant increase in service on all three of these routes.
Need your mic on, sorry.
We had presentations a couple of weeks ago when we approved that agreement with Salt Lake, right?
That's correct. Yeah, this is that, and on to all the other changes that this has caused or that are related to this. So in terms of the east-west connections, currently we have two routes that connect Front Runner and the U of U 1 block apart in Salt Lake City. That's routes 2 and 220. We are proposing to join those on 2nd South and offset them so that we have 7.5 minute, 7 to 8 minute frequency on this corridor, which provides high frequency on that corridor that's identified as a very important corridor in the Transit Master Plan. Salt Lake City's eventual goal is to get this to 5-minute service. We can't get there yet, but this is a step in that direction. This also helps with the connection between Front Runner and the bus, with the buses only being 7 to 8 minutes apart, even if there is some kind of a weather-related delay or some other kind of a delay on the train. That transfer is still pretty easy to make. With 15 minutes service, it's not terrible, but with a 7 to 8 minute connection, it becomes even better. On the west side of Salt Lake City, we're seeing a substantial increase in service. Currently, Route 516, you can see it only kind of serves the west side and then doubles back on itself in downtown. Route 9 kind of only serves the east side of the city. There's not a good connection to get between the west side and the east side of the city. So with the new Route 9, is replacing some of the current 516 service, and we're also proposing to implement a new Route 4. So again, there's some service on 4th South. There's also other service on 4th South that starts at State Street going east currently, but there is not a route that goes all the way across the city on 4th South or 9th South. So there'd be 2 new connections all the way across the city. And the changes to Route 17 and to Route 4 are not an increase in operating costs. We're increasing the cost of the Route 9 by increasing the level of service and extending that, but the resources that are currently being used for the 516 would be used for the 4. Also, on the west side, we have routes 519 and 520 that serve Fair Park and Rose Park neighborhoods. We're just proposing to turn their destination the other way. Right now, the connection to Salt Lake Central is not very productive. That's not where people in Rose Park are headed. We've received...
unless they're trying to get to UTA to work. I'm just kidding.
Sorry, Carlton.
But I should be the sacrificial lamb.
So we've received quite a bit of feedback from these communities that they would rather have a direct connection to downtown rather than having to transfer at Salt Lake Central to another bus to get downtown. And so again, this is same operating budget, just tilt the routes the other way to provide a better connection. This also helps set the stage for service that will be implemented as part of the transit master plan in these neighborhoods that will continue directly downtown, kind of help build up that market before we're able to implement the 15-minute service in this neighborhood as well. In terms of the east side of Salt Lake County, we also have a few changes. With the implementation of Route 4, that actually takes over a substantial portion of the current Route 228. So Route 228 currently starts in Holiday, goes up through East Mill Creek, and then up the foothill up to the U, and then on 4th South all the way to Salt Lake Central Station. Route 4 takes over most of that, and the part of the 228 that serves East Mill Creek would be taken over by increased service on Route 223. Currently, Route 223 runs 120-minute headways once every 2 hours. That's unacceptable for a transit service, in our opinion. And so we would like to return Route 223 to its original level of service, which was every 30 minutes, 30-minute peak, 60-minute off-peak service, to better serve that community on the east side of the valley, connect them to the U, Research Park, and the University Medical Center as well. This also involves Route 3. Currently Route 3 and Route 228 connect Front Runner to Research Park, and we would be moving Route 3 from Salt Lake Central to North Temple Station so that Route 3 would be able to connect to both directions of Front Runner and provide a more consistent connection from Front Runner to Research Park. And Route 3 is also the route that serves the VA hospital, which is an important constituency for us. So it's improving the connections to those destinations, as well as kind of streamlining the service on the east side, making that service a little bit better. And then Route 4 is, as I mentioned before, connection all the way across town, where Route 228 currently isn't. Route 4 would also run on weekends, which Route 228 currently doesn't. Route 228 only runs on weekdays. Route 4 would run 7 days a week. In terms of the avenues, right now, as I mentioned, Route 3 would move from Salt Lake Central to North Temple. We would also move Route 6 from North Temple to Salt Lake Central. This has the side benefit of Route 6 and Route 11 running the same route between Salt Lake Central and LDS Hospital. So we would offset those routes. They're both 30-minute service, but that would provide 15-minute service on that corridor between Salt Lake Central and LDS Hospital. I should also mention, you might be seeing on some of these slides that the end of line at the U is migrating a little bit. We are currently discussing with U of U's planning department and with health sciences. They've requested that we find another location to lay over our buses besides the front door of the University Hospital. That conversation is still progressing, but what you see before you is what we're taking to public hearing in the next few weeks. So that may not be the exact routing through the U of U, but we will still continue to serve the U of U with these routes. We just don't know exactly where they're going to turn around. The state capitol, there's an interesting tension between what people that work at the Capitol and attend the legislative session want and the outward perception of our service to the state Capitol. People do like to criticize Route 500 for always being empty, and it actually barely coasts in above our productivity standard because it's such a short route, but we have an opportunity to optimize our service to the capital by combining routes 200 and 500 in this manner, so that the 200 would replace the 500 and serve the capital every 15 minutes all year. That we actually predict, even though we're serving the capital every 15 minutes all year instead of just during the legislative session, we actually predict that that will lead to an increase in operating and passenger efficiency because we're reducing the duplication between those two routes. In Tooele County, we've also, as I mentioned, have some Prop 1 money that we are hoping to invest in service improvement. So this is our current configuration. We have 2 routes from Tooele, 1 route from Grantsville that go to the airport in downtown Salt Lake City, Airport International Center. And we're proposing to streamline that a little bit, have 1 route from Tooele, 1 route from Grantsville during the peak. Currently, the Route 451 runs from Tooele on a premium fare. We would reduce that to the local fare to replace Route 453, which runs from Tooele on a local fare, and add additional trips to Grantsville. So currently, there's only 1 trip a day from Grantsville to Salt Lake City and back. And that leads to some of the same concerns that have been expressed earlier in this meeting with Pleasant View service. If it doesn't work for your schedule, then you're just out of luck. You know, the most recent time I rode the 454, I spoke with a gentleman who only rides the bus 3 days a week because he has to work extra hours on the other 2 days to facilitate his bus habit on the first 3. And I expressed my amazement that he rode the bus at all. Currently, we average about 19.5 boardings per trip, and Grantsville has about 11,000 people, and 75% of which commute to Salt Lake County. So we feel like we can do a little bit better capturing that market. So we're increasing the number of trips from Grantsville from 1 to 5 in each direction to provide better coverage during the peak. And then we are also adding a new flex route midday. So instead of the 453, we'll have the F453. I know it's very catchy, but the F453 would run from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., basically to cover the gap between the peak hour service that we're running on the 451 and 454. And that would run between the 2400 North and Power Station on the Green Line. So it wouldn't come all the way downtown like the rush hour service does, but you would still have that connection from the Green Line, and you'd be able to travel between Tooele and Salt Lake counties all day. We've met with several stakeholder groups in Tooele County. We haven't had the public hearing yet, of course, but in our conversations with hospitals and the DMV and people that work in Tooele County Transportation, the response has been overwhelmingly positive about adding this midday service. So we're excited to be able to explore that further with them.
Well, you're adding midday service, but you're also adding 4 during the peak hours too, right?
That's correct. So
there's 5 trips instead of 1 in each direction?
Yes, from Grantsville.
Okay. Right.
And there will also be 5 trips in each direction from Tooele.
And from Tooele or Grantsville, what does the peak hour represent? I'm just curious, is that like 6 a.m.? Is it 7 a.m.? How's that?
So we're, currently the service that we are pitching to them is that they would be able to arrive downtown between 7 and 9 a.m. and leave downtown from 3:30 to 5:30 p.m. And that is always subject to revision based on local needs, but that's kind of, we're trying to at least cover the rush hour commute better. Instead of, right now there's 1 trip from Grantsville and it leaves at 6:12, and if you're not on it, you're out of luck. If you didn't want to get downtown at 7:30, then too bad. You know, so we're hoping to improve that commute experience as well as provide the midday service. Also, as regards the airport and the International Center, the midday flex route will serve the International Center like the peak hour service does. So that's a significant improvement for businesses in that area, as well as Route 551, which is our circulator, currently goes from the airport to the International Center 4 times in the morning and 4 times in the afternoon. We are working with businesses in the International Center who are sponsoring additional trips on the 551, and you can also see there's a little deviation on the north end of the route. That is to serve the new Amazon building. And we're currently working with Amazon on passes and service agreements In addition, we would move the 551 to Power Station so that it could connect to Route 217, which is Redwood Road, which is our highest volume bus route in Salt Lake County, and provide a connection to people that live on the west side of the valley that's more direct than going via downtown on the Green Line to get to the 551. In Ogden, as I mentioned, we have some more Prop 1 service that we're rolling out. We've been in that implementation for the last few years, and so we have, this is just brand new on top of everything that's already running in Weber County. We have the Ogden Trolley, the downtown circulator that will run on our trolley buses that we have, run every 20 minutes, connect to Front Runner Station to destinations in downtown. And we're also adding a new flex route, the F620. We'll also start at Ogden Station, but it will go west of the freeway and serve industrial areas in Ogden and West Haven. And then it will tie into the Front Runner line at the Roy Station also. And that'll run every 30 minutes peak, every 60 minutes off peak to serve those employment centers and just provide a lot more coverage in that area that's historically kind of been a gap for us. And so that doesn't affect anything currently running in Ogden. It's just new stuff on top. The situation is a little different in Utah County because we've agreed with the county leadership to spend the fourth quarter money a little differently, at least for the next few years. So we are looking at ways to reallocate inefficient service in Utah County to provide service improvements. This map is a little tangled. That's because Lehigh Station is complicated. The street network is not any better than the bus network around Thanksgiving Point. But what we're looking at is we currently have a Route 811 that serves during the peak, travels from Provo all the way up to Draper 5 times a day each way, and also runs on Saturdays and Sundays. On Saturdays, it is the least effective route in Utah County. And on weekdays, it is towards the bottom. And so we feel like we could use those resources a little bit more effectively. Instead of providing service from Provo all the way to Draper 5 times a day each way, or 5 times in the morning, 5 times in the afternoon, we would like to create a new route, Route 871, that uses those same resources to just travel between the Lehigh Front Runner Station and Draper Town Center Track Station all day, every 30 minutes. Because right now there is a gap, is you cannot get between Utah County and Salt Lake County on the local bus except during rush hour. This would provide a lower cost alternative to Front Runner all day, and also increase local connectivity because these businesses around Lehigh Station, a lot of the employees also work in live in southern Salt Lake County and work in northern Utah County. And so they would have an additional local bus connection from Draper or from the Trax line to these businesses in the Lehigh Station area. That will also allow us to provide additional midday service to those businesses. Currently, we only provide peak hour service to those businesses around Lehigh Station. This would allow for midday trips and increase their mobility and their chances to travel. Another interesting benefit to this that just kind of came out of this discussion is 811 currently runs on Sundays and it's not very effective. This would also allow us to provide Sunday service on Route 850, which is the second highest volume route. Nothing's going to compete with UVX, of course, but after UVX, the 850 is the next highest volume route in Utah County. Currently runs on State Street between Provo and Lehigh. Currently only runs Monday through Saturday. And so this would allow us to repurpose some of those resources that we're using to run inefficient 811 service and actually open up quite a bit more access to transit service on Sundays via Route 850. So we feel like this is a pretty positive change for Utah County. Again, it's not an increase in operating budget because it is a reallocation of some of those resources. And I forgot to click back and forth, but there's the soup before and after. So the 811 would be replaced by the 871. The red line representing peak hour service gets replaced by the blue line representing all-day service. And then you know about the microtransit pilot. We are not proposing to discontinue any of these flex routes, so the microtransit pilot does not need to happen on change day. As we've mentioned before, it's probably better for it to happen a little bit after change day, just so that it doesn't get lost in all the noise. But we're very excited about that as well, both as an opportunity to expand coverage and to provide maybe more appropriate service for areas where traditional transit hasn't historically functioned very well. So we expect this to be a part of our service offerings, a part of our life for the foreseeable future. We're very excited about it as well. Any questions lingering about any of the changes that I've just described? I know that it's a lot of changes. This is probably our biggest change day in over 5 years.
I would like to take full credit. I'm just kidding. I do applaud you for taking a look and sort of taking realistic looks at things and figuring out if we're spending the money, how we can spend it more effectively. I think it certainly serves the public better. I know when I met with Mayor Hale last week from Midvale and kind of in that Bingham Junction area and businesses and you know, this is probably a discussion for maybe even a year from now, and as they open up their second kind of super fun site and bring in more residential there, whether there's something like a trolley shuttle or something like that that can swing through those businesses and pick them up and get them to the stations. As you analyze those, maybe that's something you can take a look at as it matures. And obviously, there'd have to be some funding that came with it, but I know I can see a lot of those businesses as they look at how they deploy their resources on parking structures. You know, maybe some of them could, maybe even they could be participatory with us on helping to fund the operations.
Absolutely. And I should mention, in addition to this, we are also still working on the 5-year plan. The draft is finally complete. It's 83 pages long. I'm excited to share with everyone. But as we continue to receive feedback from communities and local stakeholders, we will always be incorporating that into the 5-year plan that will be on a regular update schedule, and that our advisory board or advisory council will also be reviewing regularly. So, I mean, that this is a lot. This is also not the end.
Yeah, sure. But I think I have Kent, and then
Eric. You mentioned you were going to have a public hearing or something like that out in Tooele.
That's correct.
Will you also have something like that down in Utah County?
Yes.
Will you please inform me of when those meetings are, because I would like to be present.
So
I represent those two counties.
So in just a minute, I'm going to turn the time over to Andrea, and she's going to discuss our extensive communication plan for these changes. And
all right,
so that does
you.
include the public hearings.
Well, and that dovetails with what I was going to ask as well, is how we were going to get this communication going. So that's great. I will wait.
So,
Andrea,
take it away.
Thanks. Thank you. So as Eric said, this is one of the largest change days we've had in many, many years. So we've been working very closely with planning the last few weeks to make sure we have a very robust and proactive outreach and comment period, and then leading up to change day in August when the final plans are announced, to make sure we effectively educate and inform our riders. As we said, we want our riders to be aware of the fact that this is a large change day, and we acknowledge that change can be hard for them. But we also want to reinforce that most of these changes are good. We are increasing frequency, we are expanding weekend and Sunday service, and a lot of positive changes are coming. So we do want to reassure them that as we have focused more on the bus service in the past few years, we are listening to them, where they want more frequency and they want a longer span of service. And so we want to prepare them effectively, but also try to reinforce the positive. We also want them to be very engaged in the comment period. So today we are launching a comment period on all of these changes. It's pretty comprehensive, and I'll get into some of the details of that in a few minutes. But we just really want to encourage people to review these changes, to understand them, and to give us their feedback. And there will be a lot of ways to give feedback. All of our typical ways, we'll have online comments, email comments, phone comments. Eric gets the snail mail if people submit them that way. And then we will have several public open houses out in the community. So here's the overall schedule. So as I said, today we're kicking off the comment period. We submitted the public hearing notices to all the major papers yesterday, and they will, for the most part, they will mostly run on Sunday, except for the Tooele Transcript Bulletin, which we'll publish tomorrow. So those notices are out. And to answer Trustee Millington's question, we are having a total of 6 open houses starting on April 2nd. I haven't listed which ones are on which day yet. We just solidified those recently. But there will be 3 in Salt Lake County, 1 in Davis-Weber County, 1 in Tooele, and 1 in Utah County. So all of those notices are out, and we'll be working to make sure we have all the materials and information and staff on hand to attend those public hearings. So some of the key things that we're doing is shortly after this meeting, we'll be launching pretty comprehensive information on our website. It'll be accessible right from the homepage, and even every route has a description of what is being changed. And emphasizing the benefits of it. There's also a section on the website that will show where some of the routes are kind of bundled in a way and how they are impacting each other, where people can look and view how those changes are happening. They'll be able to click down to their county if they want to just look at the specific county that they live in. And there are links to submit comment by email, and as well as the information to submit comments by phone and regular U.S. mail, etc. We're going to be pretty proactive with our media relations. We want to do some specific outreach to reporters and outlets in all of the counties. And so we'll be working on that as this effort gets underway. And then we will also be preparing a lot of on-system information to get the word out to our existing riders. So we're working on signs for the buses, handouts or flyers that train hosts and other staff can carry, and just really encouraging people to submit comment. We're going to be informing our own employees. As soon as this happens, our bus operators start getting questions, and so we have information being prepared to send out to our employees very shortly. And the public hearing notices will also be available on the state's website or Open Meetings website by the end of today. So those are some of the things that we're doing just to communicate, and that's just for the public comment period, which will close on April 19th. And after that, as Eric and his team finalizes the changes, we'll have a kind of a phase 2 communication and education effort leading up to the changes. Any questions?
Ken?
Would it be possible to have somebody available for the first Thursday evening in April to attend MAG meeting where all the mayors are, or was that already on the schedule in the county commission? There's a question, however, whether or not they're going to cancel the April meeting. That would raise it. So we're not really sure at this point in time if that will actually happen. If it does happen, I would like somebody to be present there for MAG, because you'll have all the mayors in the county commission right there.
More than happy to do that. Any other opportunities like that in any of the counties, please just let us know, and we'd be happy to accommodate that.
Because I would like to suggest the same thing for Weber and Davis as well. So thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We'll look forward to both hearing back from the public on these changes, but applaud you and the rest of the staff that have been involved in trying to think through all the intricacies. I just want to know, have you erased your whiteboard yet, or is
That's still on my whiteboard.
Okay.
I have a couple other things. I think we're actually the host for WFRC this year. I don't know when the next meeting is.
JPAC.
Or JPAC. Yeah. Would this be something that we might bring to JPAC? I mean, it involves everybody else around the state.
We can chat about it. I think it has possibilities, and at least talk about the concepts and directions.
Sure.
Yeah.
The other thing is, you mentioned that on 2 or 3 of those routes, it doesn't increase the cost at all because you're repositioning the assets. Have you looked at what, but there seems to be a lot of increased service, especially on weekends and that kind of thing. Have you looked yet to see how many additional miles these buses will travel new routes versus old routes and what that may do to costs?
Yes. So we're currently working with the operating business units, Ogden, Salt Lake, and Timpanogos business units, as well as special services for the midday flex route service to Tooele County. And we are on top of what those costs are. And
what are they?
Well, in Salt Lake County, we're increasing the operating budget by about $5.3 million to cover the increased cost of the fixed route service and the paratransit service.
But that's partially covered by the agreement with Salt Lake.
That's completely covered by the agreement with Salt Lake City. And then in Tooele County, the cost of the midday flex route is about $317,000 a year, which is covered by existing Prop 1 money.
Okay.
That hasn't been spent on operations.
All right. I'm sure they'll be pleased to hear that. I know they will be. I've talked to all three of the commissioners in the last week.
The response has been very positive from Tooele County. So. And then, again, in Utah County, it's not an increase in operating budget. And in Ogden, Weber County, those routes are being covered also by existing Prop 1 money. So then it's all the other changes in Salt Lake County are kind of this interesting shuffle, but it's the only increase in operating cost is coming from
still the same deck of cards. We just have them being dealt in a different way.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, both Eric and Andrea. Appreciate your presentation. Oh, we've received our first public input.
Now there's public comment.
So that's all right. On other business, our next meeting will be on March the 20th at 9 a.m. Unless there's any other discussion or if I'm missing anything, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
I will second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? We stand adjourned.